On an ordinary Thursday evening, the small town of Willow Creek hummed with its usual rhythm. Streetlights flickered on one by one, neighbors waved from driveways, and the distant hum of traffic on Main Street blended with the quiet rustle of leaves in the warm spring air. In this familiar, almost sleepy environment, 8-year-old Sarah Mitchell left her apartment just after 5, dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, her work bag slung over her shoulder. She had always been meticulous about her routines. For Sarah, leaving on time, stopping briefly at the gas station for a cup of coffee, and texting her husband Mark a simple "home in 15 minutes" had been as natural as breathing. That night, though, those mundane routines would fracture into something unthinkable. Sarah's walk to her car, mere minutes from her apartment complex, appeared uneventful. A blue sedan, parked awkwardly near the gas station entrance, caught the eye of one passerby, though at the time, no one thought to linger or question it. A man, casually leaning against the side of the building, seemed to be watching, though whether he noticed Sarah, no one could say for certain. Inside, the cashier, preoccupied with a customer buying cigarettes, failed to register the subtle tension that would, in retrospect, feel like a prelude to the disappearance. Sarah entered the station, purchased her coffee, and stepped back outside, moving with her usual brisk efficiency. That was the last time anyone definitively saw her. When Sarah did not return home within the expected 15 minutes, Mark initially assumed she had stopped to chat with a coworker or taken a slightly longer route home. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, unease began to set in. He called her cell phone, first once, then twice, only to hear a disconnected tone. Mark's anxiety quickly escalated to panic. He retraced her route on foot, checking the gas station and scanning the streets, asking nearby residents if they had seen her, but the answers were dishearteningly vague. Some remembered seeing her enter the store. Others only noticed the blue sedan, or the man who lingered outside. No one saw her leave. By the time the police were called, a pattern of subtle inconsistencies began to emerge. Officers arrived, professional and calm, taking down statements, noting descriptions of the sedan, the man, and the scattered details of the evening. The initial response was methodical. Dispatchers logged her missing person report, patrol units canvassed nearby streets, and detectives requested footage from the gas station cameras. But what they found, or rather, didn't find, was disturbing. The security cameras clearly captured Sarah entering the store, yet her exit was conspicuously absent. There was no video of her leaving the parking lot, getting into her car, or walking toward home. It was as if she had evaporated in plain sight. Friends and family began piecing together her last known actions, trying to reconstruct the ordinary evening that had transformed into a nightmare. Her co-workers recalled her cheerful demeanor that afternoon, joking about weekend plans, completely unaware of the shadow looming over the next few hours. At home, her husband frantically went through her belongings, looking for anything that might explain her sudden disappearance. Her wallet, phone, and keys remained untouched on the kitchen counter, indicating she had not intended to leave home without them. The meticulous order of her life suddenly contrasted starkly with the chaos of the unknown that had swallowed her. The detectives, meanwhile, were confronted with a perplexing puzzle. The blue sedan, though described by witnesses, yielded no license plate trace in the initial canvassing. The man outside the gas station could not be identified. The cashier had only a fleeting impression, recalling someone vaguely, the memory blurred by the passage of minutes and the monotony of routine. There was no struggle, no discarded items, no fingerprints on the door handles. The absence of evidence itself became an anomaly, a chilling echo that reverberated through the investigation. How could a young woman, known for her caution and predictability, vanish in such a populated area without leaving any trace? As night fell over Willow Creek, the quiet streets now seemed sinister, the familiar streetlights casting long shadows that whispered possibilities too frightening to articulate. The family, unable to sleep, imagined every scenario, their minds cycling between hope and dread. They considered accidents, misadventures, and the horrifying prospect of targeted abduction. Each moment of uncertainty tightened the grip of fear. Meanwhile, investigators began marking grids for a methodical search. Every alley, every side street, every parking lot would be canvassed. The early hours of the investigation were painstaking, slow, and measured, yet already a sense of urgency pervaded the police station. Neighbors who had observed Sarah that evening replayed their own limited perspectives, offering fragments that conflicted with one another. The timing of her arrival at the gas station, the angle at which she exited the store, the precise positioning of the blue sedan. Each recollection, though small, hinted at a scene more complex than the police initially assumed. Even routine events, the cashier's transaction, the man's lingering presence gained weight, as though the mundane details were threads of a tangled web. The ordinary became extraordinary, and the certainty that had defined Sarah's life was replaced by uncertainty and fear. By the end of the first 12 hours, a clear pattern emerged, or rather, the lack of a pattern. Sarah Mitchell had vanished in a way that defied logic and instinct. No footprints leading away from the station, no traces of her vehicle, no confirmed sightings past that evening, only an empty space where her presence should have been. The investigation began to stretch beyond mere protocol into a psychological landscape of obsession, fear, and relentless questioning. Every detective, every officer, every family member felt the weight of the unknown pressing down, the creeping realization that something far more calculated or far more tragic had occurred. And yet, as dawn approached, one thought lingered above all. Sarah's disappearance was not a random act. It was a rupture in the natural order of the town, a disruption of routine that left friends, family, and investigators staring at an invisible trail, struggling to comprehend the unthinkable. Every phone call, every witness statement, every piece of footage, however incomplete, became part of a larger, haunting puzzle. In that silence, Willow Creek began to understand the magnitude of what had happened. A young mother, a familiar presence in the streets they all walked every day, had simply vanished, and the ordinary night had transformed into a nightmare whose resolution remained agonizingly out of reach. The case would linger in the community's consciousness for days, weeks, and months to come. And even as the early investigations unfolded, a subtle but persistent unease settled over Willow Creek. The gas station, once a mundane waypoint, now felt like the epicenter of an invisible enigma. Every passerby, every routine errand, became a reminder of the fragility of safety, the tenuousness of familiarity. In those first hours, the stage was set for an investigation that would stretch across years, one that would intertwine procedural rigor with the raw, human emotion of a family desperate for answers, leaving a lingering question in every mind. How does someone simply disappear into the night, leaving only traces too faint to follow? By the early hours of the next morning, Willow Creek was quietly stirring. But for Sarah Mitchell's family, time had already slowed to a torturous crawl. The initial shock of her disappearance had given way to a gnawing uncertainty, one that refused to ease even as police vehicles patrolled the familiar streets. Officers arrived at the Mitchell home with precise efficiency, taking inventory of the scene, cataloging every item that might serve as a clue. In the living room, the sofa cushions were undisturbed. In the kitchen, the coffee cups from the previous evening sat neatly in their usual places. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing broken, nothing that would indicate a struggle had taken place. Even her car, a modest sedan parked in the driveway, appeared untouched. Her purse remained where she had left it, her phone charging quietly on the counter, untouched. The absence of disruption should have been reassuring, but in reality, it only deepened the sense of unease. How could a young, careful woman vanish without a trace from a location she frequented daily? Investigators began the methodical work of canvassing the neighborhood, their presence both reassuring and disquieting to the residents. Each door they knocked on revealed tiny, seemingly inconsequential details. A neighbor who remembered hearing Sarah laugh while passing in the morning, another who noticed a blue sedan parked irregularly at the gas station, yet no one could offer anything concrete. Questions were repeated in slightly different forms, and answers began to blur under the weight of memory and time. Witness statements, while detailed, were contradictory in minor ways, feeding the detectives' frustration. Every inconsistency became a thread, but none led to a solid endpoint. Surveillance footage from the gas station was collected and meticulously reviewed. Sarah's entry into the store was clear and ordinary. She carried her work bag, ordered a cup of coffee, exchanged a brief smile with the cashier, and moved toward the exit. But beyond that moment, The video abruptly ends, offering no visual evidence of her departure. The detectives replayed the footage countless times, scrutinizing angles and timestamps for any overlooked detail. A glint on the floor, a shadow in the corner, a reflection in a glass door, anything could hold significance. The more they searched, the more apparent the impossibility became. Sarah seemed to have disappeared between two camera lenses, as though the space she occupied simply no longer existed. Meanwhile, forensic teams attempted to use digital tracking to uncover her movements after leaving the gas station. Cell tower triangulation offered only sparse, inconclusive data. Her phone's final ping, according to the records, came from the general vicinity of the station, but nothing beyond that. Traffic cameras along nearby streets were collected and examined, but footage revealed only vehicles moving past, pedestrians hurrying along sidewalks, and the occasional wandering cat. Sarah's presence left no measurable imprint on these devices, no time-stamped glimpse to anchor her path. For the detectives, each technological dead end was a blow, eroding confidence even as they tried to maintain procedural rigor. As the investigation broadened, law enforcement coordinated interviews with local businesses along her expected route home. Baristas, convenience store clerks, and gas station attendants were questioned repeatedly, each providing recollections of a young woman seen that night, framed against a background of ordinary transactions and idle chatter. Yet when investigators pressed for specifics about interactions with unknown individuals or unusual behavior, nothing surfaced. There were no reports of a stranger following her, no disputes in the parking lot, no sudden disturbances. In each account, Sarah Mitchell's behavior was consistent with the careful, predictable person everyone knew, which only heightened the mystery of her disappearance. The detectives also scoured Sarah's digital footprint, examining emails, social media posts, and banking transactions for any hint of planning, travel, or distress. Her accounts reflected nothing beyond the mundane. Reminders about grocery lists, a note about picking up the car from routine service, an update on her daughter's school recital. There was no evidence of secret communications, unusual purchases, or withdrawals. Her online life suggested a woman anchored firmly in her everyday world, yet her physical presence had vanished, leaving no bridge between the virtual and the tangible. For the family, the contrast between Sarah's orderly life and the chaos of her disappearance was gut-wrenching, intensifying the emotional strain of waiting and hoping without clarity. Within days, the absence of leads began to foster public speculation. Local news outlets ran brief segments on the case, highlighting the initial police efforts, the collection of surveillance footage, and interviews with neighbors. Citizens debated the likelihood of foul play or random abduction, offering theories that ranged from improbable to plausible. Some suggested a voluntary disappearance, a sudden decision to leave town. Others feared a predatory act, with a stranger targeting Sarah at the gas station. While investigators publicly maintained measured caution, internally the absence of physical evidence prompted growing unease. In a town where streets were familiar and faces recognizable, the sudden disappearance of a resident under normal circumstances was nearly unthinkable. For the Mitchell family, the tension was relentless. Mark, her husband, oscillated between hope and despair. At first, he meticulously retraced her path on his own, visiting the gas station multiple times, attempting to visualize the moment Sarah had vanished. Later, he accompanied police on canvases, helping to identify locations along her presumed route. Each step, each retracing of the evening's events, only magnified the psychological toll. Her parents vacillated between comforting and confronting Mark with questions, their shared grief manifesting in bursts of anger, fear, and disbelief. The family dynamic, once steady and supportive, became strained under the weight of uncertainty, and even the closest friends found themselves overwhelmed by the ambiguity of a situation that defied resolution. By the end of the first week, detectives began to appreciate the full scope of their challenge. Unlike typical missing person cases, where a struggle or errant behavior might indicate a course of action, Sarah's disappearance left no tangible markers. There were no footprints leading away from the gas station, no damaged property, no abandoned items to suggest an accident or theft. The town itself while small and usually secure, offered no natural hiding places or secluded paths that could account for the complete absence of witnesses. In essence, Sarah Mitchell had vanished from the collective memory of Willow Creek streets, leaving behind only fragments of presence and a growing atmosphere of collective unease. Investigators expanded their network, reaching out to state police and requesting assistance from federal databases to see if any similar incidents had occurred within a wider radius. They cross-checked missing person reports from surrounding counties, looked for vehicles matching the blue sedan description, and investigated individuals reported in local criminal registries. Every lead, every potential connection, led only to further dead ends. Even the most experienced detectives admitted to feeling a creeping sense of futility, as though the case existed in a vacuum outside the normal rules of disappearance and investigation. In those first critical days, the psychological impact of the unknown began to emerge as a theme as potent as any physical evidence. The human mind, desperate for narrative and closure, wrestled with fear and grief in equal measure. The Mitchells' attempts at hope were punctuated by nightmares, the constant replaying of the last message Sarah sent, and the imagined scenarios of what could have happened. Investigators, trained to maintain objectivity, found themselves empathizing with this anxiety, acutely aware that the lack of evidence could be as destructive as any confirmed harm. Each unanswered question added weight. Each silence became another puzzle piece in a case that refused to be assembled. Despite the growing pressure, detectives remained methodical. They mapped the area surrounding the gas station, reviewed the lighting and sightlines, and considered environmental factors, the timing of nearby traffic, the placement of security cameras, and the potential for bystanders to misinterpret what they saw. This careful, almost obsessive attention to detail reflected both professional necessity and a subtle acknowledgement of the case's strangeness. Every overlooked detail could mean the difference between resolution and endless ambiguity. The first week closed with no significant breakthroughs. Sarah Mitchell's disappearance had entered the annals of Willow Creek as a haunting anomaly. A young mother, careful, predictable, and deeply loved, vanished on an ordinary evening with no witnesses, no crime scene, and no immediate explanation. The police reports, though detailed, were punctuated by phrases like "no signs of struggle" and "no additional leads," underscoring the case's impossibility. The community, once confident in its security and predictability, now harbored a quiet but persistent fear. Questions lingered in every corner of the town. How could someone disappear so completely? And perhaps more hauntingly, where could she be? Even as investigators prepared for the next stage of their work, long-term surveillance, interviews with distant contacts, and potential search expansions, the Mitchell family faced the cruel weight of waiting. Every phone call, every knock on the door, every passing stranger became a test of endurance. In those hours and days, the emotional tension became almost unbearable, as hope and despair oscillated, leaving a profound impression of helplessness. And beneath it all, the eerie void remained. A young woman had stepped into a familiar space and simply vanished, leaving the police, her family, and the town itself struggling to comprehend the unfathomable mystery. Weeks had passed since Sarah Mitchell vanished, and the initial haze of shock that enveloped Willow Creek had settled into a tense, persistent unease. The town's residents, once confident in the rhythm of their daily lives, now glanced at each other with quiet suspicion, aware that the disappearance of one young mother had unsettled the very foundation of their sense of security. For investigators, the case was increasingly vexing. Early leads had dissipated into dead ends, and the methods typically effective in missing person scenarios produced only frustration. Then, as if slicing through the monotony of routine inquiry, a tip arrived, an anonymous call reporting the frequent presence of a man unfamiliar to locals lingering at the gas station in the weeks surrounding Sarah's disappearance. The description was vague yet precise. A man in his late 30s, unremarkable in appearance, but whose repeated appearances in the parking lot had been noted by multiple witnesses. Detectives followed up immediately, retracing the hours and patterns described by the tipster. Her friends, interviewed again, recalled casual encounters. During routine coffee runs, they had glimpsed the same car parked incongruously near the pumps, a dark sedan whose presence never seemed entirely accidental. In the background of conversations, there were fleeting impressions of discomfort, small moments of unease that only now, in retrospect, appeared significant. These recollections, mundane at first, were combined with newly obtained gas station receipts and timestamps to establish a preliminary pattern. The man had been present consistently in the weeks leading up to Sarah's disappearance, always coinciding with her visits or near the time she would have been expected to arrive. Investigators pursued background checks, social media searches, and cross-references with local law enforcement records. They discovered a string of minor criminal offenses in nearby towns, harassment complaints, restraining orders, and instances of suspicious behavior bordering on stalking. Though none of the incidents were violent enough to warrant serious prison time, the pattern was enough to warrant concern, suggesting someone capable of calculated, obsessive behavior. Each new file added layers to the emerging portrait. A man who seemed ordinary in casual encounters, yet whose digital footprint revealed a history of premeditated harassment. The investigators noted a subtle but growing possibility. This disappearance was not random, and the man could have been intentionally monitoring Sarah's routine. While detectives pursued these leads, the Mitchell household was unraveling under the pressure of the unknown. Mark, Sarah's husband, became increasingly obsessive, retracing her likely path between the gas station and their home multiple times daily. He meticulously recorded times, distances, and minor details, speaking to anyone who might have seen her car or noticed an unusual presence. His inquiries sometimes bordered on confrontation, leaving neighbors unnerved yet sympathetic to a man desperate for answers. His fixation, born of love and grief, was mirrored by his mother-in-law, who spent hours reviewing security footage herself, noting every pedestrian, every vehicle, and every fleeting shadow in hopes of finding the smallest clue that investigators might have missed. The house itself grew quieter, each room echoing the tension of unspoken questions, the walls holding the weight of absence. Investigators also returned to the gas station, scrutinizing the scene in painstaking detail. The pumps, the storefront, even the corners of the lot were examined under bright portable lights. It was during one of these sweeps that subtle anomalies were first noticed. A faint scratch on one of the pump handles, inconsistent with normal wear, suggesting the handling of a tool or object. A smudge on the security camera housing, faint yet measurable under forensic analysis. And footprints captured weakly on older frames of the footage, partially blurred, yet distinct enough to suggest purposeful avoidance of visibility. Each detail, minor and easily overlooked, carried a growing implication. Someone may have intentionally manipulated the environment to conceal their movements and obscure Sarah's path. The detectives traced the footsteps through the surveillance footage, enhancing images frame by frame. The prints, though partial and inconsistent, indicated someone moving with intention, hovering just outside camera range, retreating from direct view, and exploiting blind spots. Analysts worked to match stride lengths and shoe patterns to local registries, a painstaking process that offered nothing conclusive but increasingly suggested that the disappearance was not a matter of chance. The pattern hinted at premeditation, a chilling orchestration behind what initially seemed like a simple, isolated event. In parallel, investigators began interviewing employees who had worked at the gas station during the period in question. Initial statements had offered little beyond casual recollections, but now, prompted by emerging details, these accounts gained new weight. The cashier who had been distracted the night Sarah disappeared remembered a man loitering by the entrance, frequently checking his watch and glancing toward the doors. The janitor recalled seeing the same vehicle parked for long stretches, sometimes when no customer appeared to occupy it. These statements, cross-referenced with receipt times and timestamps, constructed a mosaic of presence. The man was there consistently, observing patterns, and critically present when Sarah arrived. For Mark, the combination of investigative progress and new revelations brought a double-edged sense of hope. On one hand, the notion of premeditation suggested a tangible lead, a point of entry for law enforcement to follow. On the other, the realization that Sarah's disappearance might have been intentional and directed toward her specifically was devastating. It forced the family to confront a chilling reality. Someone had likely targeted Sarah, monitoring her carefully, and was capable of actions that erased her presence from the immediate world. The balance between hope and despair grew increasingly delicate, the weight of possibility pressing down on every decision, every memory, every moment spent imagining her fate. For the detectives, the focus shifted from general search and observation to deliberate tracking of patterns. They mapped every appearance of the suspect's vehicle, cross-checked dates with Sarah's routines, and began canvassing more distant areas for potential sightings. In these days, small towns surrounding Willow Creek were canvassed, each inquiry adding pieces to a puzzle that still defied completion. The emphasis on precision and methodical investigation, rather than immediate breakthroughs, reflected the reality of modern missing person cases. Meaningful progress often arrived in fragments, each requiring careful analysis before contributing to the narrative of events. Even as the law enforcement team pursued these investigative threads, the community was acutely aware of the shifting narrative. Ordinary evenings in Willow Creek were now tinged with wariness. Casual conversations included speculation about the strange man at the gas station, about the vulnerability of routine tasks, and about the way a life could seemingly vanish in seconds. The psychological impact of an unseen observer, a figure whose intentions were unknown but whose presence had been noted repeatedly, magnified the town's collective unease. Sarah's disappearance was no longer an isolated incident. It was a story of proximity, threat, and the unsettling notion that everyday environments could conceal danger. By the end of this segment, investigators had established a framework. An unfamiliar man with a history of minor offenses, patterns of observation, and possible premeditation had been present in the vicinity of Sarah's disappearance. Environmental anomalies, scratches, smudges, partial footprints hinted at deliberate concealment. Witness statements, previously dismissed as inconsequential, gained weight under this new context, pointing to coordinated presence rather than random coincidence. While no direct evidence tied the suspect to her disappearance, the pattern was unmistakable. Sarah had likely been observed, tracked, and perhaps manipulated, pushing the investigation beyond the realm of chance and into the territory of targeted action. This realization carried an emotional resonance that was as potent as any forensic clue. The Mitchells were forced to contend with the deliberate nature of the event. The notion that Sarah had been watched, her routines noted, her environment subtly altered, all without anyone initially realizing the risk. The psychological weight of that understanding was profound, creating tension not only for the family but also for the investigators who now approached the case with a sharper, more urgent perspective. What had seemed like an ordinary disappearance was slowly revealing itself as something far more deliberate and terrifyingly methodical. As the shadow of premeditation emerged, the narrative of the disappearance shifted irreversibly. Sarah Mitchell's case was no longer a matter of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It suggested the opposite. She had been in the right place at exactly the wrong time, observed by someone capable of anticipating movement, erasing traces, and controlling the narrative of her final hours. The combination of minor anomalies, the stranger's repeated presence, and the meticulous retracing of patterns hinted at a calculated plan, one that challenged assumptions about safety, visibility, and vulnerability in everyday life. By the close of these investigations, the stage was set for the next chapter. The focus would inevitably move toward identifying the man in question, scrutinizing his history, and examining the intersection between his presence and Sarah's disappearance. Yet, even as law enforcement prepared for the next steps, a profound sense of isolation lingered. The traces left behind were subtle, easily overlooked, yet suggested a precision that was almost surgical. For the Mitchell family, every day without answers reinforced a haunting truth. The disappearance was no accident, and the shadows that had obscured Sarah's path were not random. The case had begun in the mundane, but now, 3 weeks later, it had evolved into a study of deliberate, shadowed observation and the terrifying realization that someone had orchestrated the events that led to her vanishing. 3 years had passed since Sarah Mitchell disappeared, and Willow Creek had settled into a fragile routine, yet the emptiness she left behind remained a silent, persistent presence. Life in the small town moved forward on the surface streets were busy. Shops opened and closed. Children laughed in playgrounds, but beneath the ordinary rhythm, a subtle tension lingered, a quiet acknowledgement that one of their own had vanished without explanation. For Sarah's family, time had not healed, but rather layered grief upon grief. Each anniversary and holiday, a stark reminder that she was not coming home. In the first weeks after her disappearance, there had been frantic searches, public alerts, and exhaustive canvassing. By the third year, that immediacy had dulled, replaced with the weight of prolonged absence, the long silence that stretched between hope and despair. The annual vigils had become ritualized, small gatherings of community members, friends, and family lighting candles in her memory, at the same gas station where she had been last seen. Each candle represented a fragment of collective anguish, the warm glow, a small defiance against the cold fact that Sarah's fate remained unresolved. Media outlets occasionally revisited the story, highlighting the enduring mystery and the toll on her loved ones. Yet even national attention did little to provide clarity. Each article, each televised segment, brought fleeting attention, followed by silence. The police, too, approached the case with cyclical diligence. Cold case units rotated through, reopening files, reviewing surveillance footage, interrogating past witnesses, only to shelve the case again after producing no actionable leads. Each investigative cycle ended the same way. Sarah's trail vanished into the shadows, and the investigators were left with frustration that mirrored the family's despair. Occasionally, sporadic tips arrived, ephemeral sparks of hope that were quickly extinguished. An anonymous caller once claimed to have spotted a woman matching Sarah's description at a highway rest stop 50 miles away. Another report suggested a sighting in a neighboring state, an unverified claim from someone who said they saw her in a shopping center. Each lead triggered a flurry of activity. Police followed up, dispatched patrols, examined surveillance cameras, and interviewed potential witnesses. Yet each investigation returned the same result: inconclusive. No trace of Sarah's presence could be confirmed. For the Mitchells, these false leads were both a balm and a torment, brief moments of optimism that reminded them how much they wanted answers, followed by the harsh reality that Sarah's life had somehow slipped from their grasp entirely. The cyclical nature of hope and disappointment became almost unbearable. Within the family, the emotional toll was profound and pervasive. Mark, Sarah's husband, struggled with insomnia, his nights fractured by dreams he could not distinguish from memory. He meticulously revisited the sequence of events surrounding her disappearance, replaying the moments in his mind and physically retracing her last known route, even years later. The monotony of sleepless nights was punctuated by moments of obsessive detail, reviewing old receipts, combing through traffic camera footage, questioning neighbors for the smallest overlooked detail. His sense of responsibility, coupled with guilt for not being able to protect her, intensified a persistent anxiety. He was constantly alert, scanning the environment for anomalies, interpreting the mundane through the lens of suspicion and loss. Friends noted a subtle change in him. The warmth of casual conversation had eroded, replaced with a perpetual tension, a man suspended between life as it was and the void her absence created. Mark's children, though young at the time of Sarah's disappearance, carried their own fragmented understanding of loss. Their memories were incomplete, shaped more by absence than presence. They remembered the gentle touch of a mother who had once guided their mornings and the soft laughter that had once echoed through their home. Yet these recollections were interspersed with uncertainty, moments of confusion, and the unsettling question of whether those memories were real or reconstructed from stories told by their father and extended family. The psychological impact on them was subtle but persistent, a quiet withdrawal at times, questions asked hesitantly, and a growing awareness that their mother's absence was permanent and unexplainable. The household itself became a shrine to memory and grief. Sarah's belongings remained untouched, her wardrobe and personal items preserved as if she might return at any moment. Her children learned to navigate the world with the constant presence of loss, the absence shaping their understanding of safety, family, and the fragile nature of life. Sarah's mother, particularly, embodied the struggle between memory and reality. She refused to remove her daughter's belongings from the home, keeping her room intact, clothes folded, shoes lined neatly, personal items arranged as they had been 3 years prior. The effort was not vanity but a form of endurance, a way to maintain a tangible connection to a daughter she could no longer see. Each day, each glance at the preserved room reminded her of the life interrupted, the routine broken, and the hope that, somewhere, some fragment of Sarah still existed. It was an emotional bulwark against the inexorable march of time, a refusal to accept the incompleteness imposed by disappearance. In these quiet moments, grief was private, intimate, and overwhelming, a constant undercurrent beneath the surface of daily life. Public perception, meanwhile, shifted as time passed. The initial wave of communal concern gradually gave way to skepticism. Conversations that once centered on worry and search efforts slowly turned toward speculation, gossip, and, at times, blame. Neighbors, previously vigilant, began to question the veracity of sightings and reports. Social media debates emerged, with theories ranging from voluntary disappearance to foul play, often reflecting assumptions rather than evidence. For the family, this societal shift added another layer of isolation, the dual burden of coping with personal grief while defending the integrity of their loved one's memory against insinuation and doubt. The town that had once rallied in concern now maintained a careful distance, a social coldness that mirrored the absence of concrete answers. Investigators revisited the security footage of the gas station regularly, analyzing every frame for overlooked details. Forensic experts scanned video for anomalies, from subtle shadows to fleeting movements in the periphery, yet nothing conclusive emerged. Each review deepened the sense of frustration. Sarah's disappearance seemed to exist outside the normal parameters of criminal behavior, a vanishing act that left no discernible trail. Analysts speculated on possibilities. Had she been abducted by a stranger, targeted by someone she knew, or had she chosen to leave? Yet each hypothesis ran up against the same obstruction. There was no evidence to support any definitive narrative. The case existed in a persistent state of ambiguity, the gap between conjecture and truth widening with each passing day. During the 3-year period, community support manifested in small but poignant ways. Fundraisers, online campaigns, and vigils continued sporadically, a reminder that while time dulled immediate panic, it did not erase empathy. Volunteers scoured forests, highways, and abandoned properties when tips suggested possible leads, maintaining a degree of collective engagement. Yet the repeated dead ends imposed a psychological toll on both community members and investigators, eroding morale and intensifying the sensation that Sarah's case was a puzzle designed to frustrate, a mystery engineered to persist indefinitely. The town's landscape became, metaphorically and literally, a canvas of waiting and uncertainty. Through these years, the emotional gravity of absence was amplified by the subtle cues of everyday life. Birthdays were celebrated without Sarah, holidays were marked by empty spaces at the table, and the mundane rituals of domestic life, dinner, bedtime, morning routines, echoed with the void of her presence. Each repetition reinforced the haunting nature of her disappearance, that one ordinary errand, intended to take mere minutes, had irrevocably altered the family's trajectory. The psychological tension built slowly, compounded by a persistent undercurrent of fear, anger, and yearning. Every glance at the gas station footage, every review of tips and leads, became an exercise in both hope and despair. As the 3rd year drew to a close, the sense of stagnation intensified. For the Mitchell family, the silence was deafening, a 3-year-long void marked by ritual, routine, and unresolved trauma. The town had learned to live with her absence, albeit uneasily, while her family remained suspended in a liminal state between hope and resignation. Public memory had faded slightly, yet the emotional imprint remained, a haunting presence that resisted the passage of time. The cumulative weight of these years, the repeated false leads, the unrelenting questions, and the subtle evidence of targeted disappearance, all coalesced into a profound understanding. The resolution, if it came at all, would not be simple, and the truth, when revealed, would be deeply transformative for everyone involved. The final weeks of this period saw renewed determination from a small faction of investigators who refused to shelve the case. They revisited every tip, cross-checked every report, and explored any overlooked footage. In doing so, a pattern began to emerge, faint yet undeniable. Minute anomalies, often dismissed earlier, hinted at deliberate interference. Scratches, partial footprints, and subtle alterations in security frames suggested that Sarah's disappearance might have been orchestrated with careful forethought. These clues, previously buried in the noise of routine investigation, now began to form the faint outline of a planned act, shifting the narrative from mere vanishing to calculated abduction. By the close of this 3-year period, the story had evolved from immediate panic to protracted anguish, from surface-level investigation to deep, methodical scrutiny. The emotional toll on the Mitchell family had deepened, leaving them fragile, vigilant, and obsessed with fragments of a life interrupted. The town had normalized a level of unease, balancing grief with skepticism, while investigators faced the limitations of technology, memory, and chance. Yet in the background, the quiet accumulation of overlooked details, subtle patterns, and persistent anomalies laid the foundation for what would eventually become the breakthrough in the case. The silence was ending, though no one yet fully understood how. The shadows that had concealed the truth were beginning to thin, preparing the stage for the revelation that would ultimately answer the haunting question of what had happened to Sarah Mitchell. The town of Willow Creek had settled into a routine of uneasy acceptance. The gas station where she was last seen remained a quiet landmark, familiar yet tinged with an almost spectral presence. Its pumps, sidewalks, and parking lot had been examined countless times by law enforcement, yet nothing had surfaced, no overlooked evidence, no eyewitness corroboration, no trail to follow. Life for her family continued in a state of fragile endurance, each day a reminder of absence and uncertainty. Mark Mitchell retraced old routes in vain. Neighbors spoke cautiously, and the broader community gradually redirected its attention, though the memory of Sarah's disappearance lingered, uncomfortably lodged in the consciousness of the town. It was into this suspended reality that a sudden breakthrough unexpectedly emerged. The catalyst was a routine traffic camera upgrade at the very intersection adjacent to the gas station. The town had decided to modernize its system, replacing outdated equipment with high-definition, networked cameras capable of more sophisticated digital analysis. As technicians reviewed older footage, archiving and reformatting files for the new system, something unusual caught the eye of a forensic video analyst. There, in grainy but discernible footage from the night Sarah disappeared, were frames previously overlooked, buried within hours of standard recording that had never been fully scrutinized. The images captured a sequence of moments that, at first glance, seemed mundane. Sarah walking toward her car, her pace casual, a slight glance over her shoulder as if acknowledging something behind her. But as analysts slowed the footage and enhanced the shadows, the scene revealed something far more disturbing. From the corner of the lot, a figure emerged indistinct, shrouded in darkness, yet moving with deliberate intent. The posture, the timing, the angle of approach all suggested calculated action. The figure intercepted Sarah as she reached her car and, in a motion subtle yet unmistakable, guided her away from the illuminated lot and toward a narrow, shadowed alley adjacent to the station. The sequence lasted only a few seconds, but its implications were profound. This was not a random encounter, nor a spontaneous disappearance. It was coercion, premeditated and deliberate, executed in a space that had been trusted as safe, under the casual scrutiny of an otherwise quiet town. Analysts ran multiple iterations of the footage, verifying frame rates, ensuring no digital anomalies could distort interpretation. Each review confirmed the chilling reality. Sarah had been intentionally guided from the public eye, leaving the gas station and the normal course of her life. Investigators immediately mobilized. They cross-referenced the timestamps with license plate records from nearby streets, local business surveillance systems, and previously collected witness statements. The team quickly discovered a pattern that had gone unnoticed: multiple gaps in surveillance coverage that coincided with the timing of her disappearance. Security systems at nearby convenience stores and businesses, assumed reliable, had either been offline or recorded with technical errors that night. Analysts theorize that these lapses were not coincidental, suggesting that someone with knowledge of the environment may have deliberately chosen this time and route to exploit vulnerabilities. These small, once dismissed details now coalesced into a narrative far more sinister than previously imagined. Sarah's disappearance had been planned, executed with attention to timing, control of visibility, and manipulation of space, a stark contrast to the random or impulsive explanations considered in the immediate aftermath. The renewed urgency extended to witness follow-ups. Analysts and officers returned to individuals who had previously been interviewed, asking detailed questions about minor observations that had initially seemed irrelevant. One cashier, for example, remembered a shadowed figure standing near the alley's entrance, previously dismissed as a passerby. A delivery driver recalled an oddly parked vehicle that had not matched any known resident or customer. Each minor observation, recontextualized by the new footage, became a critical piece of the puzzle. Investigators cataloged and cross-referenced every fragment, from faint shoe impressions near the alley's edge to the subtle angle of security lighting that had left parts of the lot in near darkness. The combined data painted a more coherent picture of premeditation, of a disappearance orchestrated with foresight and deliberate control of environmental conditions. The emotional impact on Sarah's family was immediate and intense. For Mark, the footage was both a relief and a source of horror. Relief, because it confirmed that Sarah had been taken in a manner that could be investigated, providing a concrete lead where none had existed for years. Horror, because the nature of the footage revealed a level of calculated planning that no one could have anticipated. For the Mitchell children, now older, the realization that their mother had been deliberately abducted introduced a new layer of fear and helplessness, compounding the long-standing grief of her absence. Her mother, who had maintained Sarah's belongings meticulously, wept quietly at the visual confirmation that her daughter's disappearance was the result of a controlled, intentional act rather than a random tragedy or accident. Across the family, the footage catalyzed a shift from passive suffering to renewed engagement, a willingness to confront the complexity of what had happened, however terrifying it was. Law enforcement responded by revisiting the investigative strategy entirely. The new footage provided both a temporal and spatial anchor for the case, allowing teams to focus on the alley and surrounding properties with forensic precision. Crime scene units were deployed to re-examine areas previously swept but not analyzed with contemporary methods. Soil samples, trace evidence, and potential latent fingerprints were collected with enhanced techniques that had not been available in 2019. Every crack, crevice, and shadow became a potential repository of evidence. Investigators coordinated with regional databases to identify vehicles, unusual activities, and known criminal patterns that might match the methods observed in the footage. The scope of the inquiry expanded, transforming what had been a stagnant cold case into an active investigation fueled by tangible leads and high-resolution evidence. Public reaction as the footage became known through official channels was mixed. Local media reported cautiously, mindful of the ongoing investigation, framing the story in terms of renewed hope and investigative diligence. Community members expressed shock and concern, many realizing that the disappearance of Sarah Mitchell was not merely a tragic anomaly, but the product of deliberate predatory action. Social media discussions swirled with speculation about the identity of the figure in the footage, with some residents recalling vague impressions they had never deemed significant. While authorities cautioned against conjecture, the collective awareness of the calculated nature of the abduction marked a turning point in public perception. Sarah's disappearance was no longer a mystery of absence alone, but a case of orchestrated victimization. As investigators analyzed the footage in painstaking detail, forensic specialists identified subtle markers that had previously been unnoticed. The figure's gait, the length of time spent waiting in the shadows, and the manner in which Sarah was guided indicated someone familiar with both her habits and the environment. Experts suggested that the abductor may have conducted surveillance in the days leading up to the event, noting the timing of vehicle arrivals, pedestrian movement, and the lighting conditions of the lot. This deliberate preparation distinguished the disappearance from spontaneous criminal acts, framing it instead as a premeditated and highly controlled operation. The realization added a chilling dimension. Sarah had been targeted not randomly, but by someone who had observed, calculated, and executed a plan designed to remove her from public view with minimal risk of detection. The discovery of the footage also prompted cross-jurisdictional collaboration. Agencies from neighboring towns and counties reviewed unsolved cases that might share similar methods or geographic connections. Patterns were compared, leads shared, and databases combed for vehicles matching the partial license plate visible in the footage. Analysts considered potential motivations, evaluating personal relationships, prior threats, and regional criminal activity. The complexity of the investigation expanded, but so did the clarity of its direction. For the first time in 3 years, the case had a tangible trajectory, a discernible chain of events beginning with Sarah's approach to her car and culminating in the dark alley that had concealed her from public view. Amid this renewed investigative momentum, the emotional weight for Sarah's family intensified. Relief that there was finally evidence to pursue was accompanied by renewed anxiety and fear, knowing the details of what had happened had been so precise and deliberate. The footage, while illuminating, forced them to confront the terrifying reality of the calculated danger she had faced. Therapy sessions were revisited, family discussions grew more intense, and even casual interactions were colored by the knowledge that Sarah's disappearance was no longer an abstract uncertainty, but a concrete and terrifying act of human intent. Yet within this fear, there was also a spark of hope. Hope that with actionable evidence, the investigation could progress, that the person responsible could be identified, and that the final pieces of the mystery could eventually be uncovered. By the end of this phase of investigation, the 3-year silence that had haunted Willow Creek was broken. The footage transformed the narrative from endless speculation to actionable inquiry. Sarah Mitchell's disappearance, once a void in both family life and community consciousness, had gained a tangible shape, a sequence of moments captured by technology, revealing the coercion that had led her from the public eye into the shadows. Investigators now possessed the first definitive evidence that her disappearance was intentional, targeted, and orchestrated, setting the stage for renewed pursuit, forensic breakthroughs, and, potentially, justice. The emotional arc shifted from helplessness to engagement, from endless waiting to active pursuit, as the town and Sarah's family confronted the harrowing truth. She had not vanished randomly. She had been taken, and the steps to unravel what had happened next were finally beginning. The revelation from the traffic camera footage set a series of events into motion that the town of Willow Creek had not anticipated. Police began tracing the vehicle captured in the shadows that night, a dark-colored sedan parked at the periphery of the gas station just minutes before Sarah Mitchell disappeared. The investigation, once stalled by gaps in evidence and dead-end leads, now had a concrete starting point. Plate numbers were cross-referenced with DMV records, local surveillance, and regional law enforcement databases, leading to a man whose profile immediately alarmed detectives. Known in neighboring counties for a series of minor abductions, harassment charges, and stalking incidents, he had maintained a low profile in Willow Creek itself, appearing in public only sporadically, yet familiar enough to residents that he could move without arousing immediate suspicion. The discovery of his connection to the footage sent shockwaves through both investigators and Sarah's family, who had long oscillated between hope and despair. Detectives quickly obtained search warrants for the suspect's residence and surrounding properties. What they found painted a portrait of careful planning and chilling obsession. In a modest storage unit on the outskirts of town, previously unnoticed because it had been rented under an alias, police discovered items that immediately tied the suspect to Sarah. Personal belongings, clothing she had been wearing the night she vanished, a small notebook with her name written in precise handwriting, and other articles matching family descriptions lay undisturbed in neatly stacked piles. Forensic teams meticulously documented fingerprints, DNA traces, and fibers, each analysis strengthening the connection. Evidence was not scattered carelessly. It was curated, almost ritualized, suggesting a level of premeditation and control that investigators had not anticipated. The very organization of the storage unit indicated that Sarah had been held locally for some time, her presence concealed, but within reach of someone who understood both the environment and the limitations of law enforcement oversight. Interviews with neighbors, acquaintances of the suspect, and individuals who had interacted with him in unrelated incidents added layers to the understanding of his behavior. Witnesses recalled brief interactions that, in hindsight, appeared insignificant. A car parked late at night near rural properties, a man asking questions about local traffic patterns, or subtle surveillance-like behavior near areas frequented by Sarah. Each anecdote, when pieced together, reconstructed a timeline of observation and calculated risk. Investigators began mapping the final hours of Sarah's life, integrating the newly verified footage, witness statements, and forensic findings into a cohesive sequence. The result was a chilling picture of coercion, control, and confinement that had occurred entirely within the town limits, contradicting earlier theories that she had been transported far from Willow Creek. Forensic experts and detectives then focused on identifying the concealed rural property where Sarah had been held. Using environmental profiling, land records, and insights from prior minor incidents involving the suspect, teams pinpointed a location that had been largely overlooked: a small parcel of wooded land with a deteriorating shed and partially buried storage areas. Here, the culmination of the investigation unfolded. Excavations revealed hidden compartments beneath the shed, carefully camouflaged beneath debris and overgrowth, where Sarah's remains were finally located. Alongside her, remains were objects confirming her identity and the timeline: a watch matching the one she had worn that evening, fabric consistent with her clothing from the night of her disappearance, and personal items meticulously placed, indicating deliberate concealment. Lab testing corroborated the forensic link between these items, the storage unit, and the suspect, creating a comprehensive chain of evidence. As the findings were confirmed, Sarah's family faced the culmination of years of torment. Mark Mitchell, her husband, experienced a mixture of grief, relief, and profound sorrow. The confirmation of Sarah's death ended the agonizing uncertainty, yet the knowledge that she had been held so close to home and manipulated so thoroughly compounded the trauma. Her children, now older, struggled to reconcile the reality of her final hours with the fragmented memories of their mother, while her mother clung to familiar belongings with renewed poignancy, knowing that the items she preserved had been part of the evidence that finally revealed the truth. The emotional weight of closure was immense. Relief that Sarah's story had a resolution intertwined with horror at the precision and intentionality of the act that had removed her from life. Investigators meticulously reconstructed the final moments based on combined evidence. The footage indicated that Sarah had been guided toward the vehicle with subtle coercion. Witness testimonies and forensic evidence from the storage unit showed that she had been confined locally, her movements closely monitored and controlled. The suspect's methods, revealed through careful analysis, illustrated a meticulous understanding of both physical and psychological control. Isolation, subtle guidance, and careful manipulation of her environment ensured that she would be removed from sight while avoiding detection. The evidence suggested that from the moment she arrived at the gas station, her path had been orchestrated, transforming what her family had assumed was a routine errand into a controlled trajectory toward captivity and, ultimately, death. The case became an example of modern investigative persistence. Digital enhancements, cross-jurisdictional cooperation, forensic analysis, and a renewed focus on overlooked evidence all contributed to uncovering the truth. Experts highlighted the importance of the upgraded traffic camera and the meticulous review of old footage. Without this technological intervention, Sarah's final movements may never have been clarified. Police statements emphasized the coordinated effort. Analysts, field investigators, forensic specialists, and detectives each played a role in reconstructing a sequence of events that had been deliberately hidden for 3 years. The town of Willow Creek, previously resigned to uncertainty, witnessed the power of patient, methodical investigation in transforming a cold case into a resolved, albeit tragic, narrative. The emotional resonance extended beyond procedural success. For Sarah's family, the confirmation of her fate, while devastating, brought an end to the relentless uncertainty that had defined 3 years of their lives. Rituals of remembrance, once suspended in limbo, could now take place with clarity, anchored by the knowledge of her final location and the circumstances of her disappearance. annual memorials, previously marked by unanswered questions, became spaces of reflection and acknowledgement of the truth. Community members, who had followed the case with varying degrees of investment, were confronted with the sobering reality of deliberate predation hidden within familiar spaces, challenging assumptions about safety and awareness in small towns. Throughout the resolution of the case, a haunting aspect remained: the precision with which the suspect had manipulated events. Sarah's last errand, a simple stop at a local gas station, was transformed into a controlled trajectory toward confinement, concealment, and eventual death. The abductor's awareness of surveillance, environmental vulnerabilities, and behavioral patterns underscored the danger inherent in deliberate predation. For law enforcement, the case reinforced the critical nature of vigilance, technology, and cross-disciplinary cooperation in addressing disappearances that initially appear random. For the public and Sarah's family, it illuminated the sobering truth that tragedy can occur even in familiar, everyday spaces, orchestrated with a terrifying level of precision. As Willow Creek processed the revelation, the case was closed with formal charges against the suspect, supported by a comprehensive compilation of forensic evidence, witness testimony, and digital documentation. Prosecutors emphasized the deliberate orchestration of the abduction and confinement, highlighting the premeditated nature of the crime. While the court process would unfold separately, the investigative truth was clear. Sarah had never left the vicinity of her town, and her disappearance had been the result of a calculated, intentional act. For investigators and family alike, the painstaking reconstruction of her final hours provided both closure and a sobering reminder of the meticulous methods of those who exploit trust and routine for sinister purposes. The narrative of Sarah Mitchell's disappearance, from the seemingly mundane act of stopping at a gas station to the harrowing conclusion, now had a complete arc. The town's memory of that quiet evening would forever be intertwined with the haunting understanding that normalcy had been manipulated, that her path had been controlled from the moment she stepped from her vehicle. Yet within this tragedy lay resolution. For the first time in 3 years, the Mitchell family could grieve fully, grounded in the knowledge of what had truly transpired. The story concluded not with speculation, but with forensic certainty, witness corroboration, and the painstaking work of investigators who refused to let a single piece of evidence remain dormant. The haunting reality lingered, even as the investigation closed. Sarah's life had been altered in the most deliberate manner, orchestrated from start to finish, and yet, through patience, technology, and determined investigation, the truth had emerged. Her last errand was no longer an open question. No longer a void in memory or time, it had been revealed in full, exposing both the cruelty of her abduction and the meticulous nature of the human mind capable of concealing it. For the town, the family, and the investigators, this truth carried both closure and the stark understanding of how easily ordinary routines can be manipulated, forever altering the course of lives and communities.